The racial divide between whites and blacks can date back as early as 1619, where enslaved Africans arrived to the United States and were sold as legal property and forced into labor. Many Southern planters forced Africans into slavery with the belief in white superiority and was done to maintain their wealth and power. Intensive labor included working as farmers, often growing tobacco, rice, and picking cotton in the fields.
During the 17th and 18th centuries, slaves often competed in numerous sports at the helm of the owner. They were forced to entertain their masters as jockeys, wrestlers, and boxers, where blacks had informal and sometimes formal boxing matches between slave champions, which were organized by wealthy planters and wagered on as bets. Slave owners often won more on wagers during these fights than on horse wagers. Good boxing slaves that earned fortunes for their masters often were given their freedom and moved away from the South so they can use their skills to better suit themselves financially. Some plantation masters organized formal swimming contests, which gave slaves a chance to display their physical prowess and gain self-esteem. These contests pitted the best swimmers as one planter against those of another. Victory provided slaves with prestige among their fellows in the slave quarters.
By the mid 1800s, slaves began to be acknowledged with rights in certain states with what is known as the Compromise of 1850, which was a step towards ultimate emancipation of black slaves in the United States through the 13th Amendment in 1865. With the next 20 years became the rise of black athletes who pioneered professional athletes for others, starting with Isaac Murphy in 1884, becoming the first black jockey to win the Kentucky Derby. By 1908, Jack Johnson became the first black American to be named heavyweight champion. 12 years later, the Negro Baseball League was formed by Rube Foster, who was the lead organizer in 1920.
World War II presented a new opportunity for blacks to establish themselves, often competing and representing the United States in war and in the Olympics, but continued to face racial scrutiny upon return. Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals in 1936 in the Olympics in Berlin, but still faced racism upon returning to the U.S. Boxer Joe Louis was a focal point of anti-Nazi sentiment leading up to and during World War II. Baseball was desegregated in 1944, soon after the United States went to war in 1941. Jackie Robinson was allowed to be the first African American to play in the MLB in the modern era in 1947.
Following World War II, other black African Americans began to receive more notoriety, such as Ernie Davis, becoming the first black African American to win the Heisman Trophy in 1961. Also, black athletes started to have say in things such as Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight during the 1960s, where he exemplified religious freedom, racial justice, and the triumph of principle over expedience. He refused to join the U.S. military, citing religious beliefs in opposition to America's involvement in the Vietnam War. He didn't fight for 4 years until his conviction was overturned in 1971. Other black athletes began to demonstrate racial equality, such as the event of the 1968 Olympic Black Power Salute, with an act of protest by African American athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos, which they raised a black glove fist. This signified human rights during the national anthem of the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. By 1975, Frank Robinson became the first black general manager of Major League Baseball. Roughly 10 years later, general manager of the LA Dodgers, Al Camponis, made questionable comments on live television as to why many blacks aren't in the front offices, which stirred great controversy in the sports world. Many of these events have led to league regulations, such as the Rooney Rule, which was passed in 2003 that requires teams to interview at least one minority candidate for a head coaching or executive operations position.
These efforts to rectify racism has led to the advancement of blacks in athletics and coaching positions. Although rights of African Americans has progressed in recent years in regards to sports, racial conflict still exists in our society today, largely exploited by social media, whether it is from LA Clippers owner Donald Sterling using racial slurs, or former Dolphins offensive lineman Richie Incognito making in-the-dark comments, they are turned public and more frowned upon today than they ever once were. These are some of the issues that still exist in sports today, and we can only be hopeful to progress in the many years to come.